Well, hello, everyone. Uh, we are coming up on the halfway mark, so congratulations to everyone, and welcome to Module 4. So one of my first announcements this semester asked the question, what is American literature? The question is, of course, pertinent to us since we're studying a particular segment of American literature, but it was also very pertinent uh, we might even say a consuming topic of discussion for the people who lived in the era we're studying. Reading the commentaries from the time, it's hard not to feel like Americans in the 19th century had well, a real inferiority complex, and they worried that they were perceived as less cultured, less creative than other people. That may or may not be true, but the concern is really evident in what they had to say. So let's talk about what made them feel this way and worry about the quality of the literature that was being produced in the US. First, at this time, we did not have a strong tradition of valuing our own authors. From the time of Washington Irving, who was, one of our earliest famous American writers, on through Stephen Crane, writing at the end of the 19th century, authors regularly became well regarded because English reviewers proclaimed their worth. And both of these guys did very well selling in the British market. Only once they had the stamp of approval from outside of the US did they really do well in the US. So what US writers learned from this was, in a very practical sense, if you wanted to make it, you didn't have to really publish here. you could just go elsewhere, just bypass the US public and the US market entirely, and then come back to it. All right. So that's one thing that happened. Second, this situation of undervaluing our authors was actually exacerbated by laws governing the marketplace for the US. With our deep concern today and our awareness of copyright and how intellectual property is a thing, it will very much, no doubt, surprise you that the first really effective copyright laws in this country date only from the 20th century. In the 1870s, they attempted some reform, and this was largely through being pressured by publishers outside the US, but it was really kind of half-hearted, that law in the 1870s, and it was hard to comply with. But until then, the US was literally the Wild West of pirate publication. When Charles Dickens toured the US in the 1840s, one of the things that he incessantly and bitterly complained about was that when fans came to see him, they always had pirated copies of his books with them, and he was rather put out by it. Now, what this meant for the US authors was there was considerably less demand for them because they were on the site and they would demand, recompense if they saw their work being pirated. So publishers instead said, we don't even need American authors. We'll just grab whatever the hot thing is over in the UK. We won't have to pay for it, and we'll still make a bundle. And so largely, that's what they did. So, there just wasn't, there wasn't really a marketplace where writers could make a living in a large way. All right, not in book publication anyway. Lastly, we have a philosophical concern that plagued the people of this time, and it comes down to a question of practicality and whether this, meaning practicality, is antithetical to creativity. Right about the time of the founding of the US, the French writer Crèvecoeur published Letters from an American Farmer, and he basically talks, about what it's like living in this novel democratic society perched on the edge of the unending wilderness. But one of the things that he stresses over and over is that the Americans value industry and productivity over all other considerations, and that everything that we do is about work and progress. All right. So that's how he characterized this. And things had not really changed in the way Americans regarded themselves 100 years later. So this is the self-image for the character of an American at the time that we're studying. You can see it. It's still evident in Mark Twain's Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. His main character is Hank Morgan, and he's plain spoken, he's practical, he's worked his whole life making things with his hands, and he has no time for magic, ritual, and the classicism of the fantasized past that he winds up in. All right. Now, people actually worried that Americans simply weren't suited for creating art because of how we had been bred, because of how we'd been brought up. And if that was true, that meant that there would never be an American literature. Now, I guess that probably sounds a little far-fetched, a little hyperbolic, a little silly, but it did have stakes for the people who were thinking along these lines. Remember what I said last time about how they thought that their age would be remembered by their writings. If that's true and America couldn't speak up for itself and, produce something, then it meant the US was doomed to fade away. We needed art and we needed it now. And that's that really gave them an impulse to, get this going, to essentially make American literature. So that brings us to our current work dealing with real elements and the writer of Mark Twain. One way that people got around the problem, whether or not we would ever, produce a great American writer on our own, was to say, we don't really have to do that because we don't have just one America. They pointed to the regions of the country as having their separate means of expression, their separate character. And if you think about the whole, e pluribus unum thing, out of many one, this actually made this view very American in the way that it dealt with the problem. Instead of there just being an American voice, we would have many voices speaking for us, and they would all be American, though in different ways. So Twain made the jump from news writing to fiction by entering one of these regional markets that emphasize difference by showing the uniqueness of the American experience in the microcosm of the gold and silver fields of the far West. Now, this, of course, entailed developing the real in a different way than what we've been talking about so far. We're really talking about showing the flavor of life in this particular spot, this particular time, emphasizing the spirit of the place rather than getting bogged down in the details. All right. So good luck with everything. I'll post my usual stuff outlining the assignments for the week. If you have questions on stuff, if you want to check in with me about anything, I think you know how to do it by now. I sure hope so anyway. Till next time, adios.